In terms of what the Welcome Group program is, it's a program that we've been running since early 2017. In a nutshell, what we do is we match groups of volunteers, we call them welcome groups, with vulnerable newcomer households for 6 months of social support that's focused on each household's unique integration priorities. So it could be language learning, service navigation, youth tutoring. We make those matches based on a preference matching system. So we try to learn as much as we can about the interests and priorities of different newcomers, as well as the volunteers that we're recruiting into our program. And we try to make the best fit based on those shared preferences, characteristics, and skills.
There's at least 4 volunteers in a match. And depending on the language level of the newcomer household, we always add an interpreter to the match. And sometimes there's more than one volunteer who speak the newcomer's language of origin. So we began our welcome group program transition from a sort of an in-person model to a remote service delivery model by surveying all of our newcomer families and finding out, how would you like to address integration priorities online? Would you be open to connecting with newcomer or with volunteers, by the phone, over the phone, on video chats? Would this work for you? And how have your integration priorities changed during the pandemic? Like, how would we, shift the kind of support that we're offering? And we did the same with the volunteers. Would you feel comfortable meeting with, newcomer households primarily online? And what kind of training and support would be most helpful from Together Project? And then lastly, we reached out to our agency partners just to ensure that they were comfortable if we were sort of running this new pilot approach to the program. So for some newcomer participants, they really prefer a digital messaging platform like WhatsApp. Text is just easiest for them, especially newcomers who are working a lot. They really like to just be able to send voice memos or texts. Whereas other families, maybe with young kids, they really like the video platforms because that kind of FaceTime really helps them develop a social connection. We have some newcomer households who are illiterate, and in that case, phone is really important, especially if we can ensure that there are volunteers in the match who speak the newcomer's language of origin. And one thing that we've learned is that a great starting point for a match is to really focus on one weekly meeting per week over the 6-month match duration. And what we find is that kind of weekly meeting really builds a sense of trust, because the newcomers can kind of count on, okay, this is the time when I'm going to meet with the volunteers each week. And it also allows for a little bit of preparations. It's important to create a kind of a balance between consistency of like a weekly meeting, but also responsiveness if something comes up during the middle of the week that requires kind of an urgent response. So typically the weekly meetings are happening over phone or video, whereas the digital messaging chat is a great way for newcomers to kind of raise some kind of emergent concern. I received this document, I'm not sure what it means, I need help. Can you help me respond? We create these group chats that allow volunteers, newcomers, a caseworker, potentially an agency caseworker, and a Together Project staff person to all be monitoring the chat. So there's a lot of eyes on the communication that's happening between the newcomers and volunteers. And I think this really contributes to not only the safety of the program, but also just the efficiency, because, different people have different ideas and are able to share resources in the chat.
We've learned that throughout the pandemic that we can share our resources more directly with volunteers. So we've set up a few different things to make this possible. So one is on our website, we have a COVID-specific page where we are constantly updating different resources that are available, whether that's food bank support or, different financial relief, different daycare options, things that are in different languages specific to COVID. So if you have an Arabic speaking family who doesn't understand certain protocols or how to get the vaccine, we're trying to keep it updated as much as possible. And then we direct the volunteers there. So they would pull resources from our website and send those off to the family, whichever they think might be applicable. And then once we figured that was going quite well, we actually expanded it to become a newsletter. So at the end of each month, we kind of compile all the most relevant and useful different resources, including kind of training opportunities for employment, things to keep your kids busy at home, whether it's like virtual classes or different fun games they can do. And we send that off to the volunteers, and it's been quite a lengthy kind of newsletter to send off, but I think it's quite helpful so the volunteers can share things that maybe they hadn't thought of or hadn't found, and get those directly to the newcomers.
Together Project seeks to make like a minimum of 50 matches per year in Toronto and Mississauga. But within the last year, we've actually made 100 matches. And the reason for this is that there was a real kind of unanticipated efficiency of moving our welcome group program online. There's a convenience factor, I think, for volunteers who realize that they're going to be supporting newcomers, from the comfort of their own home, rather than, journeying on transit to go meet a family who may live an hour and a half away. But I also think there's just been this real collective recognition during the pandemic that we're kind of all in this together, and it's so important to really support the communities that have been the hardest hit by the pandemic. And we've had just an outpouring of volunteers who've been interested in signing up for the program.
Before the pandemic, our clients, so the newcomers, their matches were similar in length. So it'd be 6 months from the time you started. During COVID times, a lot of families are more vulnerable. They're having a harder time finding work. They may not be able to be in ESL lessons full time. They've got kids home doing learning. So ultimately their settlement is sometimes a little bit slower. So at the end of that 6 months, they may need to engage in a second full match. So we'll check in with the volunteers at that point and see if they're available to sign on for another 6 months. And if they're not for any reason, then we would just find another group of volunteers or supplement to add a couple volunteers if a few aren't able to stay on. The volunteers that I've had the pleasure of working with, a lot of them are coming back for their second matches or third matches, some even their fourth and fifths at this point. So I think what the great thing about this program is that rather than working with a ton of different people, you have this really close personal connection to one family for 6 months, and you grow that connection, you get to know them really well. And at the end of that 6 months, you can stay connected with them. It's not as if the program is finished and it's over for you guys, but you do get the opportunity to meet another family. And often those volunteers make as close a connection as the volunteers do with the newcomer family. So we can actually get at the end of that 6 months, that group saying, we've loved working together and all of us would like to be rematched with a second family. And a new thing as well, kind of as of this fall, is we're finding some of the refugee claimants we've been working with, because they have higher English levels and perhaps a little further along in their settlement, is they want to volunteer as well. I think in a lot of ways it becomes kind of cyclical in the support, is that you receive support and then you provide support. And like I said, these groups get really close together. So I think that's a great way of keeping the program going, is making sure the groups bond.
In terms of the tools that we use for performance evaluation, we mainly use pre and post surveys, so before and after the intervention, to track different metrics to track our overall impact, including, for example, newcomer self-perception of social isolation, which is informed by the social provision scale, which we find is a good way to track the kind of social connectivity of our volunteers with the newcomers that they're working with, especially because improving newcomer social connections is one of the main focuses of our program. In terms of the results that we've seen in our program, that our evaluation has kind of brought to light, It's been very positive over the course of our delivery of the remote welcome group program. We have high satisfaction with the program. Newcomers have been reporting a decline in feeling socially isolated, an increase in feeling supported by members of their community, an increase in social connections. It seems to be an effective tool for enhancing language learning. And overall, newcomers are also feeling as though they're making progress towards integration as well, and feeling more welcome in their communities. In terms of our evaluation strategy, we use both regular feedback as well as pre-post surveys to evaluate our program over the course of the last year, and since we started delivering the remote model of our welcome group program. We also add interviews that kind of allow us to collect anecdotal evidence to support those surveys, and that also can be spun into storytelling opportunities as well, and help us redevelop the program to make it better for the next round. Because our program is evaluated on a rolling basis as we make matches over the course of the last year, we have a lot of different data points and kind of evaluation points throughout the process. From one of our surveys from late last year, we found that at the outset of the program, 57% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that they felt socially isolated, compared to 31% after their participation in the program. Significantly in that spectrum, 42% strongly agreed initially, whereas only 5% strongly agreed after the match. Also, 69% of respondents indicated that they felt supported by others, compared to only 16% at the start of their matches, which is a big jump. In terms of other high-level results from some of our evaluations, in our most recent round of surveys for government-assisted refugees, 100% of households reported satisfaction with the match experience, 100% of households reported feeling less socially isolated, and 100% of households reported feeling like their match has helped them make progress towards their most important integration priorities. Also, 89% of respondents reported the formation of stronger social connections, and 78% of households reported feeling more welcome in their communities. We're constantly in contact with the newcomers and volunteers participating in our program through our supervision and support during their match. So we very much have a live, if anecdotal, feedback loop that we're constantly using to kind of reincorporate feedback learning into our program delivery. We also often survey our newcomer participants to see how they're doing in the program and to find out a little bit more about what seems to be working or not working. In terms of what clients seem to like about the program, we've had a lot of nice feedback around the flexibility of being able to connect with volunteers whenever and wherever is most convenient to them. It's a lot easier to hop on a quick video call or shoot off a quick request on an instant message, rather than wait until you schedule a in-person meeting and have to kind of wait for that time until you see the volunteers again. Some of the initial learnings that we gathered through our evaluation to help us improve the program were really recognizing the fact that because the geographic barrier was now eliminated, because there's no more need to kind of find newcomers and volunteers that are living in the same community, we could really better match skills with need. So we could really look for specific skill sets across the entire geographic area that we work in. So volunteers from Mississauga and north of Toronto, downtown Toronto, with the specific challenges and priorities that newcomers are facing. So we can really build these customized groups even more effectively than we were before. We can better connect newcomers with volunteers who can speak the same language so that they feel better understood and heard. People with a similar demographic profile, so there's a higher likelihood of a meaningful social connection. And people who maybe have had that relevant professional or volunteer experience, they can really connect in a much more impactful way. So educators with families with youth, or healthcare professionals with families that are facing medical challenges. Not having geographic barriers to our work also means that all of a sudden newcomers who previously were kind of further afield and maybe we had a harder time matching because of where they were located, all of a sudden could participate in the program a lot more effectively and a lot more quickly. In terms of reaching the volunteers that we need to participate in the program, all of a sudden, we can interview volunteers remotely, we can train them remotely. So just kind of getting people together, keeping track of everybody has been that much easier. Delivering the program remotely means that you do lose that face time, which is really valuable, not just in forming social connections between volunteers and newcomers, but even just volunteers with each other or our staff with the volunteers. And so how we've tried to counteract that is really to make sure that volunteers are connected, that they're coordinated, that the lead members of each group really feel supported by us. it's really important that we supply them with the right digital resources and support to kind of deliver on the program. And then just overall in the experience, we provide that kind of focus and guidance and structure to the experience as much as we can, while still trying to make sure that it feels organic and it feels natural in terms of how the volunteers are supporting the newcomers. What some of our evaluations have also shown us is that there are, as much as there are newcomers who appreciate the flexibility of remote support, there are a lot of newcomers that also really look to a return to the in-person model of the program. Because of a higher language barrier or a lack of comfort with technology, they feel as though the in-person support is actually fundamental to their forming social connections. What that tells us is that we have a lot more work to do to continue to build the program to make sure that those newcomers aren't left behind. So moving forward, the idea is that we'll be incorporating a lot of these elements of what we've learned through the remote model of the Welcome Group program. But of course, especially for those who really need it, who really stand to benefit from it, we do want to reincorporate that in-person support, because so many families are really clamoring for an opportunity to engage with volunteers on a kind of a face-to-face basis. Our main goal of building these social connections still really needs to kind of germinate in in-person support for some families.